As we know, acquiring reading skills is part of a very multifaceted process. There are many steps to acquiring reading skills. Phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension are all key pieces. Vocabulary specifically supports decoding. Vocabulary enhances understanding. Vocabulary also improves comprehension. When a student has knowledge of a word, the process of decoding is supported. As they decode the word, if they have some concept of the word, they will decode more easily. For example, if they're reading The Gingerbread Man and they know what gingerbread is, they might be more easily able to decode that word. Also, the word watermelon. In many picture books, they will have picture clues, and I'm thinking specifically of The Very Hungry Caterpillar, but watermelon is a pretty big word for a book like that. Essentially, a child with a larger vocabulary is going to be helped to just be a better educated guesser. That's really what we're looking for when it comes to reading. If they have some concept of a word or a subject or an object, they're going to be able to decode better. If they're reading a story about forest animals and they have general knowledge of a squirrel and the squirrel's habitat, that he lives in a forest, they're going to be more likely to be able to guess that word when they attempt to read it. In that example of reading something about forest animals, if a student has no knowledge of animals that are found in a forest, or that animals even live in a forest, they're going to stumble over words like squirrel, pine cone, seedling, underbrush. However, with oral vocabulary knowledge, they can decipher these by relating that to their prior knowledge and possibly experiences. There are several ways to foster vocabulary development. There are some explicit ways that are obviously more direct and distinguishable. However, implicit instruction is also valuable as students encounter unknown words in a text. The strategies that are pretty well researched to teach vocabulary would be pre-teaching just prior to experience in a text. Going over what those words are, how they might see it in a text, and specifically showing them those words. Repetition of exposure, and many vocabulary programs are built on this. They introduce the word's meaning, and then have students use the word in a sentence or try and find what word makes sense to fill in the blank in a sentence. Then the hook method is very often used to create a visual or cognitive association. And this would be specifically useful to students with disabilities. Students who can't just remember what a word means, they need something to help them to kind of jog their memory. Word maps may also give students ways to create associations or traits. And if you're teaching students insects, for example, and they've never seen the word insect, then if we can just even create word associations that means a bug, that means something that crawls with legs. So create traits and associations. Context clues is another strategy that you can teach students to help them sort of figure out from what's around the word what the word might mean. Generally, when we look at differentiation, there are things that, specifically that hook association. If we can create something, a mnemonic device, to help students remember that word and to figure out what is this word meaning to me or trying to say to me. For example, students who are taking chemistry for the first time often have a really hard time with the words that surround solutions. The solute, the solvent, the solution, all of those words look very similar, and it can be difficult to remember which one is the stuff that gets dissolved and the other stuff that makes the solution. So if we can help them learn that, then there might be things like, in general, first you want to remember the thing that's mixed up and has something in it is the solution. So if you look at the word solution, you have an I and an N in it. The other two do not have the I and the N. So if you can pick out that one first, and notice that the I and the N tell you the thing that has everything in it. So then you know solution. Start from that as your basis. Then the solvent might be able to be remembered because very often, especially in organic classes, you have chemicals that have to be used in a vent hood. So then you know that's the liquid that things are dissolved in, because it might have to be used in the vent hood. That might help students remember. The other thing that might be a little more easier to remember for them would be the solute is something you have to scoot out of the jar. So you use the spatula and physically scoot the particles out of the jar. It might be powder, it might be small bits of solid, like small rocks or pebbles looking thing. Either way, you're scooting the solute out of the jar and into the solvent to create a solution. Those might be ways that would help students remember those kind of tricky terms. They're not terribly difficult, but they are often difficult to remember. The other thing that is very helpful with technical terms is repetition. Repetition of exposure, pre-exposure, and exposure in your text. Again, the reason we want to equip students to have this vocabulary highly developed at all levels, pre-kindergarten all the way through college, is we want them to have some kind of prior knowledge, or else you're really releasing them to stumble around in the dark with no real ideas for what the word might be and how to create that educated guess. Equipped with knowledge of a habitat, a student can make educated guesses when decoding the words for animals in that habitat. When students know the vocabulary that applies to a text prior to their reading, they're able to check themselves as they read. If they're reading about forest and they find a word that might be squid or squish, they're going to be able to discern that those don't fit and make the determination that, at least mentally and subconsciously, they need to move on to something else. Without context clues or ideas, a student really can't determine if the word makes sense in the text and what they're reading. Lacking knowledge of vocabulary really multiplies and compounds the disadvantage of the reader. So if they don't have the reading skills, they don't have the fluency skills, but in addition to that, they don't have the vocabulary, then their disadvantage is just multiplied greatly. There's no way for them to self-check throughout the process so that they can rule out some things and kind of have some boundaries within which to guess. For example, these two sentences, the squirrel jumped from the tree, the squid jumped from the tree. A reader without any vocabulary knowledge does not have the tools, the mental tools, to be able to check the meaning and rule out one or the other of those sentences as just not making sense. Again, when you look at these two sentences, my kindergarten-age daughter read them, and then she told me that squids cannot do that because they live in water. She didn't bother to qualify that squirrels can do that. She just told me, squids live in water. They can't do that. In conclusion, we know that having vocabulary skills alone does not make a reader successful. So to the exclusion of all those other four pieces, students can't read just because they have great vocabularies. However, in conjunction with those other skills, it gives students a great advantage to have an extensive vocabulary. Thank you.